The coffee cup hit the floor, shattering inches from her wheelchair. A biker laughed. This place wasn't built for wheels, he sneered. No one helped. She lay still on the tile, soaked in coffee pride, clenching harder than pain. 30 minutes later, the diner would fall silent. Not from fear, but because someone finally walked in who knew exactly who she was. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a punch. He just saluted. Sharp. Precise. Like he'd waited years for this moment. And behind him, boots. Medals. Eyes that knew war. They didn't come to fight. They came to remind the room. Some heroes don't need uniforms to command respect. They just need one moment to be seen. A few hours earlier, the Evergreen Diner hummed with the soft, sleepy rhythm of a small-town afternoon. The kind of place where nothing happened quickly, and if it did, someone would notice and call it strange. Outside, sunlight spilled across the cracked sidewalk, warm but heavy like the stillness before a summer storm. The sky was blue, but the air had weight. Not heat exactly, but pressure, as if the day was holding its breath, waiting. Inside, the scent of scorched coffee lingered, stubborn and familiar. Booths lined the walls in faded red vinyl, their corners patched with duct tape. The fan above the counter clicked once every third rotation. No one minded. In places like this, comfort came with imperfections. Claire Monroe moved through it all like part of the furniture, unassuming, silent, steady. Her wheelchair squeaked faintly with each turn, a sound regulars barely noticed anymore. They knew her only as Claire, the one who always had the napkins folded just right, the one who never forgot your refill. She sat behind the counter, now rolling silverware, with a precision that could have come only from training. Fork, knife, napkin. Tuck, twist, place. Her hands bore the quiet calluses of someone who'd done far harder things than serve lunch. But she never spoke about that. A clock above the register ticked 5 minutes slow, as always. To Claire, that wasn't a flaw, it was routine. She liked routine. It kept her breathing even. A bell over the door jingled gently. A mailman walked in, nodded, took his usual stool. An older couple sat at table 3, sharing the same slice of pie they had every Tuesday. The radio murmured something about an incoming heat wave. Nobody listened. Near the front window, a boy, maybe 9, maybe 10, swung his feet beneath the table while sipping root beer. His father sat across from him, the kind of man whose jacket still bore faded patches from a war few asked about. The boy watched Claire, quietly. Not with pity, but attention. Claire didn't look up. She rarely did. But she could feel it. Some people stared because they saw the chair. Others looked away because they saw what it meant. The boy, though, was simply watching, not judging, just seeing. Behind the counter, the coffee pot hissed. Claire reached for it automatically, as if guided by something deeper than habit. Pour. Step. Breathe. She didn't need conversation. She didn't need thanks. She needed only the silence and something to keep her hands busy. The diner sighed, content and unaware. Outside, the clouds still hadn't come, but the pressure was building. You couldn't see it in the sky. You could feel it in your ribs. Something was coming. And the Evergreen Diner, though it didn't know it yet, was about to be the center of a storm that no one would forget. Claire Monroe didn't speak much, and when she did, her voice never rose above what was necessary. The regulars thought of her as polite, reserved, maybe even a little cold. But no one ever complained about the way she moved. There was a rhythm to her, a discipline in the way her hands folded napkins and aligned cutlery, in the way she rolled toward each table, not hurried, not sluggish, just deliberate. Like she was always keeping pace with something no one else could see. She was 46, though her eyes looked older eyes that had seen more dust fire and final goodbyes than most. Her hair was pulled back tight in a bun, not for fashion, but function. Her uniform was a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled jeans that fit just enough to move. But there was one detail that never changed a pin on her collar, barely visible unless you looked close. An eagle globe and anchor, the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. She never pointed it out, never explained it. The left leg of her jeans was folded over neatly ending just below the knee. The prosthetic beneath it squeaked slightly when she pivoted on tile. She didn't mind. To her it was honest. The leg was gone, she saw no reason to hide it, but no need to showcase it either. Years ago, she was Staff Sergeant Monroe, combat leader, convoy, commander, mentor to younger Marines who once thought they were invincible until they weren't. Her last deployment had been to Helmand Province. A roadside bomb just outside the forward operating base changed everything. They said she was lucky. She kept her life. She kept her spine. But her leg stayed behind. The hospital stay was long, the therapy longer. But what took the most time to heal was the silence afterward, the kind that followed her home and never quite left. Claire didn't go back to her hometown. She didn't join any support groups. Instead, she found this town by accident passing through on a bus with no destination that made sense. She saw a help wanted sign at the Evergreen Diner and the rest. Well, it didn't need explaining. The owner, Mr. Rickson, had been skeptical at first. A woman in a wheelchair working lunch rush. But Claire had said just one thing. Let me work the quiet shifts. I'm not here to talk. And true to her word, she never was. But she was never late, never short on supplies, and never forgot who took their coffee black, who hated onions, and who left their tip in quarters because it's all they had. She moved through the diner like a fixed star, constant unnoticed, unless you knew how to look. In her coat pocket, folded and worn, was a photo. It showed 6 Marines standing shoulder to shoulder in desert gear, their smiles wide and weary. She never took it out during her shift, but she checked once in a while to make sure it hadn't bent, hadn't faded too much. On the back, in permanent marker, someone had scrawled a message, "She carried us." Every damn time. That's who Claire was. Not a victim. Not a hero who needed praise. Just someone who had once carried others through fire, and now carried forks and napkins through quiet. And to her, that was enough. The bell above the door didn't jingle this time. It clanged. 3 men walked in like they owned the oxygen. Leather vests, heavy boots, tattoos that crawled up their necks like warnings. The tallest one had tank stitched across his chest in faded red thread. The others went by Vex and Cutter. They looked like the kind of men who took up more space than necessary and knew it. Their laughter came first. Loud, sharp, the kind that wasn't about joy, it was about dominance. It sliced through the diner like a cleaver. Claire didn't look up. She didn't have to. She felt it the way the room shifted. A weight in the air like the atmosphere before a storm goes green. She kept folding napkins one at a time. Deliberate. Steady. Tank spotted her immediately. "Well, look what we got here," he said, nudging Vex with his elbow. "Somebody roll in from the VA." Vex smirked. "Nah, that's discount G.I. Jane. Probably here for the sympathy tips." Claire didn't flinch. She placed another fork with perfect alignment. Cutter walked over to the counter and slammed his hand on the service bell 3 times in quick succession. Ding, ding, ding. Hey, we ordering food here? Or are we supposed to just admire the decor? Claire turned. Calm. Controlled. She wheeled toward them, coffee pot in hand, her voice flat but polite. "Would you gentlemen like today's special tank?" Leaned back, grinning. "Sure. Roll it over, Marine." His voice carried like a threat. Vex added, "Funny they let folks like you handle hot liquids." Ain't that against health code or something? A couple near the jukebox froze mid-conversation. A waitress behind the counter ducked her head and pretended to check the sugar packets. No one said anything. No one moved. Claire set 3 menus on their table. Knife, fork, napkin, each placed with precision. She didn't say a word. Tank glanced at the laminated menu, smirked, and reached toward his belt. With a flick, he drew a small combat knife, sharp, ugly, and far too casual in his grip. Marines like toys like this, right? He grinned. Then, without warning, he drove the blade straight down into the center of the table. It pierced the menu with a wet thwop, the metal hissing faintly as it bit through the page and hit wood. The room tensed. Even the jukebox seemed to go quiet. Claire looked at the knife, just for a second, then back at Tank. Her expression didn't change. No fear, no reaction. Only stillness, the kind you only see in someone who's faced worse and lived to fold napkins afterward. Tank wasn't done. Don't they have kitchens for you back at the VA? His tone was darker now. Testing. Looking for a crack. She rolled away, heading for the coffee station again. From the window booth, the boy with the root beer stared, unmoving. His father's jaw was clenched tight, his hand slowly wrapping around the handle of his mug. But he didn't stand. Not yet. Then it happened. Cutter stood, loudly. The kind of movement meant to draw every eye. He stalked toward Claire, his boots thudding too hard against the tile. "You deaf Marine girl," he sneered. "We're talking to you." Claire paused, turned slightly. Not fear, calculation. Her hands were still steady on the coffee pot, but he stepped closer. Too close. Without warning, Cutter reached out and grabbed the handles of her wheelchair. "Let's see what kind of wheels you're working with." He yanked her forward hard enough that the front caster caught the edge of a table leg. The tray in her lap flipped. The coffee pot smashed against the floor. Hot liquid splashed across her arm. The sound of ceramic and metal skidding across tile was deafening. And then she hit the floor. The silence that followed was not peace. It was shame, complicity, cowardice. Claire lay there for a moment, not moving. Her right sleeve soaked in coffee. Her breathing sharp but quiet. Her chair had tipped to the side. Her body curled slightly instinctively, protecting the place where her leg used to be. A photo had fallen from her pocket, creased, weathered. It slid across the tile until it stopped at the foot of the counter. No one moved. No one helped. But one pair of eyes didn't look away. The boy at the window leaned forward, lips parted. His father didn't blink. His hands were clenched into fists now white-knuckled. Claire pushed her palms against the tile. Slowly. Deliberately. The entire diner held its breath. Claire didn't move right away. The tile beneath her was cold. Her shirt clung to her back, soaked with bitter coffee, and the weight of every eye pretending not to see. Her right arm trembled slightly, not from the fall, but from the restraint it took not to scream, not from pain, but from memory. The laughter had stopped, not because the bikers were done, but because the silence in the room had become louder than them. She exhaled slowly, then opened her eyes. Near her elbow, a photo lay face up on the floor. The photo had skidded across a puddle of coffee. One corner was soaked, and part of the writing on the back had blurred, but not the important part. The words that mattered still held their shape, like they refused to fade. It must have slipped from her pocket during the fall. The edges were worn soft from years of handling the surface dulled by time. 6 Marines stood shoulder to shoulder in desert fatigues, sunburned and smiling the way people do when they've survived something they can't explain. But it was the back of the photo that stopped time. Someone, one of them, no one remembered who had written in thick black marker, "She was the reason we got home." The boy by the window gasped, barely audible. His father stared. Not at the bikers, not at the mess, but at the woman on the floor, and the words now visible to the world. Claire reached for the photo, careful not to smudge it with her wet sleeve. She turned it over gently, stared at the faces. Then folded it once, twice, and slid it back into her pocket. She rolled to her side, planted both hands on the ground, and began to push. The diner held still. No one breathed. The prosthetic clicked against the floor as she adjusted it. Her muscles moved with practiced pain. She didn't rush. She didn't grunt. She just moved like someone who had done this before too many times to count. Finally, she was upright. Her wheelchair lay tipped on its side a few feet away. She reached for it, gripped the frame, and heaved it upright in one fluid, silent motion. Claire Monroe was back in her chair before anyone could offer to help. Not that anyone tried. She brushed off her jeans smeared with dark coffee stains. The Marine Corps pin on her collar had come loose, dangling by a thread. She straightened it without looking down. Around the diner, things looked the same, but they weren't. The couple at table 3 sat perfectly still, forks in midair. The mailman stared into his empty coffee cup. The waitress behind the counter clutched a clean towel like a life preserver. No one spoke, but the air had changed, and for the first time Claire wasn't just part of the background. She was the story, and though no one moved to help her up, no one could look away. Outside, the light had turned gold, the kind that came just before the sun dropped behind the grain silos. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalk, soft and slow. Inside the diner, Claire had returned to her corner. She didn't wipe the coffee off her sleeves, didn't change her posture. She just sat still, spine-straight hands, folded neatly, eyes forward, as if bracing against something invisible. At the window booth, the boy hadn't touched his root beer. His father stood. He didn't speak to the waitress, didn't look at the bikers, just walked to the door with the kind of quiet that wasn't weakness, it was calculation. The bell above the door gave a single tired jingle as it shut behind him. He stepped onto the gravel, the crunch beneath his boots, the only sound for a full breath. Then he pulled a phone from his jacket, an old model scratched and taped at the corners. The patches on his sleeves flared briefly. In the wind, 2nd Marine Division. Desert Storm. He raised the phone to his ear. The first words were low, measured. Sergeant Daniels here. A pause. Yeah, civilian ground. His gaze drifted back toward the diner window where Claire sat like a monument that no one had noticed was carved from stone. It concerns one of ours. Another pause. A longer one. Then his voice tightened, not with anger, but resolve. You're going to want to send a team, and make it fast. He ended the call. No drama, no pacing. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, leaned against the hood of his pickup, and stared down the long, empty road, like he already knew what was coming. Back inside, Claire reached for a napkin that had fallen near her wheel. She didn't know a signal had been sent. Didn't know a fuse had been lit. She only knew that the room felt heavier than usual, that the silence had taken on a shape, and far off somewhere beyond the horizon, boots were already moving. It started with the sound of tires on gravel, not the quick crunch of a sedan or the lazy roll of a delivery truck. This was slower, heavier, deliberate, like each rotation carried meaning. The Evergreen Diner went still. Even the bikers noticed. Tank looked up from his half-eaten burger. Vex paused mid-laugh. Cutter, now quiet for the first time since he walked in, shifted in his seat. Through the dusty window, a dark green SUV pulled into view. It wasn't just any vehicle, it was military issue. The kind with reinforced corners and thick wheels that kicked up clouds of dust as it came to a clean, precise stop right in front of the diner's door. The Marine Corps insignia shimmered faintly on the side panel, catching the last slant of afternoon sun. The engine didn't rev. It hummed low, steady, like a held breath waiting to be exhaled. And then, the doors opened. 3 figures stepped out. The first was a man built like granite, broad-shouldered, barrel-chested, and walking with a cane that didn't slow him down, only marked his presence. His uniform was immaculate, though time had turned his hair steel gray. Every step he took was with purpose. As he moved across the diner, his eyes paused on the wall clock 5 minutes behind, same as it had been for years. Without a word, he adjusted the watch on his own wrist to match it. Habit, discipline, something etched into bone. Claire noticed. Her eyes flicked from the clock to his hand. And then, just barely, she nodded. A quiet salute between old warriors who still lived by the same code. Behind him came a younger Marine, clean-cut tall, with eyes that scanned the area like he was still on active patrol. In his hands, he pushed an empty wheelchair. Not fast, not with drama, just prepared. The third was a woman, a captain judging by the bars on her shoulder. Her uniform bore a row of service ribbons that glinted beneath the diner's neon light. She didn't walk. She advanced. Calm composed every inch of her radiating command. The bell above the door didn't ring. It simply gave way. They entered. No one spoke. No one needed to. Every sound stopped. The fans, the forks, even the jukebox hiccuped into silence. Claire looked up, her breath caught in her throat. The older Marine approached her, first standing tall despite the cane. He took position exactly 3 feet from her table feet, squared back straight. And then, with no hesitation, he brought his hand to his brow in a perfect salute. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," he said, voice like gravel under pressure. "Forgive our delay." Claire froze. Her hands, still stained with coffee, trembled only once, then steadied. She returned the salute. Sharp. Exact. The kind of salute you don't forget, even after years of silence. It cut through the diner like sunlight breaking fog. For a heartbeat, the room held nothing but that exchange salute returned, eyes locked past and present, merging in a single breath. Then the younger Marine stepped forward. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He placed the empty wheelchair beside her current one. Not because she couldn't move. Not because she needed it. But because that's what you do for someone you respect. You come prepared, just in case. The captain scanned the room slowly, eyes landing on the 3 men still seated, like they'd forgotten how to breathe. She said nothing. And yet every person in that room felt spoken to. At the far side of the diner, the 3 bikers stood frozen. Whatever swagger they'd walked in with had dissolved into sweat. They didn't speak, didn't apologize, just turned and slipped quietly through the back exit. The female captain watched them go, jaw-clenched, tight eyes, cold with contempt. No one stopped them. But no one looked away either. The Marine with the cane didn't look at them. He only looked at Claire. And with a voice just loud enough for all to hear, he said, "Nobody touches one of ours. Not in war. Not in peace. Not ever." Claire blinked once. And for the first time since the fall, her eyes shimmered not from pain, but from the weight of being seen. Truly seen. The diner didn't clap. No one cheered. But something had shifted. Respect doesn't arrive with fanfare. It walks in silent, like truth. And today, it took a seat. The young Marine stepped forward. He had remained silent until now, standing beside Claire like a soldier on post. But there was something in his eyes, something unspoken, heavy with memory. He glanced down, then slowly reached into the breast pocket of his uniform. When his hand emerged, It held a photograph. Old. Faded. The same one Claire had dropped earlier. He held it up, not for her, but for the room. This, he said quietly, was taken 2 weeks before we lost the Humvee. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a rifle shot. We were on a convoy just outside Sangin. I was the rookie. Still had sand in my boots, and no idea how much things could go wrong in 5 seconds. He paused, fingers tightening slightly on the photo's edge. We hit an IED, split the vehicle open like a tin can. Fire everywhere. I remember screaming, and I remember her. He turned to Claire, and for the first time she looked fully into his face. Recognition dawned. "Private Jenkins," she whispered. Her hand moved without thought, rising gently to his jawline. She touched the scar, the one she remembered seeing raw bleeding half hidden in smoke. Jenkins froze. The breath left his lungs. For a second, he looked like that boy in the fire again. Then he swallowed hard, blinking fast. He nodded. "Corporal now, ma'am. Thanks to you." Then he turned the photo around, revealing the handwriting on the back. She was the reason we got home. A few in the diner gasped quietly. He pointed to the right side of his jaw just below his ear. An old scar ran along the line, faded but unmistakable. She pulled me out. Through the fire. Through live rounds. I don't even know how she walked, but she dragged all 3 of us out before the fuel tank blew. Claire said nothing. She didn't need to. At the window booth, the boy leaned closer to his father. "Is she really a Marine?" he asked, voice barely above a breath. His father didn't look away from Claire as he answered. "No, son." He swallowed hard. "She's more than that." Then he stood, straight-backed arms at his side. At table 3, an elderly man with a weathered face and trembling hands gripped the edge of his chair. Slowly he rose, using his cane for balance, and raised his right hand in a sharp, practiced salute. He wasn't military. Didn't need to be. Some things come from the soul, not the service. A moment later, the waitress behind the counter did the same. Then the mailman. Then the couple who hadn't touched their pie. One by one, the entire diner rose to their feet. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply stood, like sentinels, like soldiers. And in the center of it all, Claire Monroe sat in silence. Not because she was ignored, but because for the first time in years, she was being honored. 1 week later, the sign above the diner was gone. The old metal lettering Evergreen Diner, rusted at the edges, and barely hanging on, had been taken down in silence. In its place, a hand-carved wooden board now stretched across the front. Burned into the grain in bold, clean lettering, it read, "Liberty Table." And just below it, in smaller print, "Where respect is always on the menu." No one made a big announcement. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just a new name and a new kind of quiet that had settled over the town. Inside, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. The far wall now held a framed display, a collage of black and white and color photographs. Some were decades-old young soldiers in Vietnam-era fatigues, arms around each other in front of choppers. Others were more recent, crisp Marine dress blues, Army Class A's Air Force flight suits. Every photo labeled with name rank and years served. At the center eye level was the photo Claire had once dropped. The original, not a copy. Beneath it, a brass plate read, "Staff Sergeant Claire Monroe. She carried us." No one had to explain what that meant anymore. And the table where the bikers once sat, still there. Still perfectly clean, but always empty. No sign said it was reserved. No manager asked anyone to avoid it. People just did. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Memory. Meaning. Maybe even atonement. Claire still worked her usual shifts. She still rolled silverware into napkins with that same quiet focus. Still poured coffee with a hand that didn't tremble. But something had shifted. She no longer tucked the Marine Corps pin beneath her collar. Now she wore it openly centered, polished, proud. And taped to the back of her wheelchair, just below the handles, was a small American flag patch. Faded, a little frayed at the edges, but upright. Every regular greeted her now, some with words, some with nods. A few veterans offered quiet salutes. She never asked for any of it, but she accepted it, because something had changed, not just in the room, but in the people inside it. Respect had never been printed on the menu, but now it was served with every meal. It was just after 5 p.m. on a Sunday when the door to Liberty table opened again. This time it wasn't loud. No laughter, no swagger. Just a young man barely 20 standing stiff in the doorway. His army dress uniform still had fold lines in the fabric, and his boots looked too new to be comfortable. He held his cap in both hands like it was the only thing anchoring him to the ground. His eyes scanned the room with hesitation. Not fear, just uncertainty. Did he belong here? Claire looked up from her corner table. Her hands paused mid-fold, resting gently on the edge of a cloth napkin. She saw him, all of him. The nervous posture, the pressed collar, the weight of 1,000 unknowns clinging to his shoulders. And she wheeled forward. No rush, no announcement, just her usual steady rhythm across the tile floor. When she reached him, she smiled, not wide, not flashy. Just enough to say, "I see you." "First deployment?" she asked softly. He nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. Tomorrow morning?" Claire gestured to the table beside hers now, unofficially hers, marked only by familiarity. "Sit down," she said. "Coffee's decent. Company's better." She reached behind the counter, pulled a single napkin from a stack, and unfolded it slowly. Then, with calm, deliberate hands, she refolded it into the shape of a bird wing's spread beak lifted. She slid it across the table toward him. "Phoenix fold," she said quietly. "Taught to every recruit in my unit. Symbol of what we become when we don't give up." He hesitated. I wouldn't want to intrude." She shook her head gently. "You're not intruding, soldier," she said. "You're continuing a tradition." He sat, slowly, carefully. And in that moment, he wasn't just a kid in a stiff uniform anymore. He was part of something older, stronger, quieter. The kind of tradition you don't read about in textbooks, one carried in silent scars and second chances. Across the diner, Sergeant Daniels raised his mug, a quiet toast. Others followed. Veterans, teachers, truck drivers, even the waitress. No one said a word, but every hand lifted a cup. And across the room near the window, the same boy who once watched Claire fall now watched her speak. His eyes weren't wide with fear anymore. They were lit with something else. Wonder, respect, a kind of reverence that only comes when a child sees what real strength looks like. Not the loud kind, but the kind that sits quietly, offers you a chair, and makes the world feel steady again. In his small hands, he now held a plastic toy tank. The same one he'd been gripping that day, but something was different on its side. A red and gold emblem had been carefully taped on. The eagle globe and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. Cut from a magazine, placed with purpose. Claire leaned back slightly, her flag patch catching the light just enough to flicker. Not a flare, not a spotlight, but a beacon. Small, steady, unshakable.